Already up there. Fantastic. Thank you all for coming. This is such a privilege for me. This is really feels to me like Oscar night. And like all Oscar nights, I'm going to go through a string of thank yous. It's thank yous tonight. Thank you first of all for Ed. And let's start off with a big round of applause for Ed. All the biographical detail, all the endless awards, all the hundreds and hundreds of letters he used to get, the approbation from his peers. It's all been well put out into the recently. We facilitated the Times and the Telegraph. They'd just about heard of him, but they couldn't believe that they hadn't. So there was much mea culpa, so they did great pieces. And Alexander, our own Alexander Beetles, wrote the Guardian piece, which I thought was the best. He was not so Shirley, it's the best. He can't be here, he sends his love from California. Lucky sod. He's out of the will. That's to Ed. So thank you for being funny, for making me laugh for 60 years. And I'm just going to say in conclusion that Ed, in my view, market leader in cartoons, Ed is the funniest cartoonist of the last 50 years. Larry runs him close, but Larry, as Alan Corrin said, was the greatest silent comedian. And Ed's eye-watering captions sometimes just put him in a class of his own. He's a great cartoonist. I've loved him for 50 years, and I hope with working with Shirley and the girls, we'll go on for another few years. We've had a great party every year. We're going to carry on having a party next year, so you're all invited.
Thank you. It's in the diary already.
Now the best of the thank yous. Thank you to Shirley and the progeny, and the girls, and Alex. Alex, don't forget Alex. Nearly left Alex off the obits. I'm in so much trouble. Alex and the three ugly sisters. If you were a bit prettier, you'd have a few more friends, you know. We laid on the white wine for you, Danielle. You've been such a support for Ed. I know he was a grumpy sod, but you took the edges off him and prepared him for the outside world. And the staff all here, like you girls, grew to love him a lot. I thank Ed also, and you for not dissuading him, for joining us as an exclusive cartoonist a few years ago. And our fortunes soared and his fortunes soared. And I think it gave him a little bit of an extra zip to be the main man. I don't usually do this. I don't get through a lot of self-congratulatory navel-gazing. But I look back through my stock and the souls. We've sold 752 Ed McLachlans over the last 10 years. That's pretty good. But it says something about the other people I'm going to thank. It's the clients. The clients react to what is a great cartoonist. They know great humour when they see it. Not ordinary common garden humour. There are hundreds of very good cartoonists that make us laugh occasionally. He made us laugh all of the time. And most importantly, he made us wince. We looked over our shoulder to see whether some wokey friend was going to be there. And that apart, he was fighting the rear guard for the anti-woke. He had such wonderful bad taste. I loved it. But also, a lot of the humour would come, I don't know where it came from, but it was just a stand out alone. And I decided tonight that I'm going to buy a cartoon. Now, years ago, the Inland Revenue told me I couldn't buy anything unless I bought it, plus a little bit extra on the retail price, but I'm going to risk it. So my favourite cartoon, and don't you, any of you go for it, because I think it's just so wonderful, is the line-up of the seagulls with chips in their mouth. It's the greatest. Ed, as you know, loved doing redraws, and I think it's only second to Bollocks. I think has was the reason as well. So thank you to the fans. Since the 1st of October, just after the sad day, you have bought 60 cartoons. So he's on a roll. So from the first exhibition, which largely due to Tony Rushton, who I'm very glad is here today, who forced the exhibition on me and the book launch. I'm so glad you did. Because I had a rule of thumb that people, the cartoonist itself didn't approach me, I didn't do it. Stupid in those days, I was young, stupid. But you persuaded me, and it's been a great relationship. Now the last people, you might be surprised at this, the last but not least are the publishers. Without the press, without the publishers, the cartooning world is nothing, and it's ever diminishing, and it's so important. Ed's relationship with the current magazines, the great Private Eye that supported him, Ingram's from the very beginning, Nick Newman importantly, Ian Heslop loved him, they supported him hugely, and they, magazine, week after week, they would publish his work and publish it large. Then that terrific magazine, which gets better all the time, the Oldie, publishes him in large, and they've been taking him, and he's been loving doing it for the Oldie. So the Oldie and Private Eye need our applause, so please. I will mention the Spectator. I love the Spectator. I think it's been going through one of its best periods ever. But I share Ed's view that they published him too, so he'd send in artwork like this, and the arseholes would do it this way. Well, I think that it's a great magazine, but I think the trouble with the Spectator is that there's the dead hand of the cartoon editor on it at the moment, and I think one of the people suffering was Ed. So great for Private Eye particularly. And because of that, and when I read it today, I had no idea it was so brilliant. I couldn't get to the funeral orations. Nick Newman went up, representing us all, and I think he read, memorized, and just did it extemporaneously. The most brilliant piece. I don't usually read things to people, but I'm going to read this tonight. It's only 4 minutes, so please don't talk on this subject. This is in Leicester, so. On my way here in the taxi, I was fully expecting to be run over by an enormous hedgehog, or at the very least trampled on by a huge marauding rabbit. Funny things seem to happen in this part of the world, and luckily they've been recorded by the artist who Richard Ingram called the Charles Adams of Leicestershire. I was truly honoured by Shirley to say a few words of appreciation, but a few words aren't enough to do Ed's work justice. Like many of the creatures which populated his drawings, McLachlan was a giant of the cartoon world. All of us at Private Eye were bereft by the news of his death. I worked at the magazine for 40 years, and seeing Ed's huge, detailed, biro rough cartoons arrive and then be turned into equally huge, exquisitely drawn artwork was a privilege. 10 years ago, I edited Private Eye, A Cartoon History, a book celebrating 50 years of cartoon art. It came as no surprise to me to find that Ed was the cartoonist who featured most of the preceding 5 decades. I included 67 of his gags and could have used many more. And among these, the huge hedgehog running over the car was his favourite. Proving so popular, he redrew it countless times. It is a quintessential McLachlan, surreal, dark, and very, very funny. The very first piece of the original artwork my wife and I bought was a cartoon of Ed's. It's a drawing of the Colosseum with hundreds of spectators being entertained by man-eating lions, and football-style crowd trouble breaking out at the back. The caption reads, "Bloody Christians, just because they're lost again." I think there's one up here, same situation, saying, "You're not singing anymore." It's appropriately epic in scale, and every face in the crowd is different. I once mentioned this to Ed, and he just said, "Of course," because he was a perfectionist. I once tried to engage him in conversation about certain of the tropes that he did, some of the recurring gags. My favourites are always the Stannah stairlifts. I was into about 3 minutes of this, going on about the Stannah stairlift, the drive-by shooting, the one that Cleese has got of the aircraftsman, which goes like this. And he listened to this with him. He said, Do I do a lot of stairlifts? I don't know. That sounds like your husband, doesn't it? Such was the nature of his perfectionism that when in the early days of Private Eye, the art director Tony Rushton, who's here tonight, wanted to publish a collection of his work, Ed insisted on redrawing all his early cartoons to show consistency. Of course, Ed's work for the Eye was just the tip of the iceberg. His career encompassed Punch, the Oldie, the Spectator, national newspapers, advertising and TV animation. But throughout, he was admirably uncompromising. While space in magazines became tighter and the rest of us grew smaller and smaller, Ed's finished gags remained the same size, and as a result, he enjoyed more exposure than anyone else. When it came to editors, he was not a cartoonist to be messed with. Ed told me that once he had sent original cartoons into Private Eye as early as 1964. Richard Ingram's took two, which he then didn't publish. Ed vowed never to work for him again. 3 years later, he thankfully changed his mind. The rest, said Ed, is history. Ed's gruffness was legendary. When we had a launch party with the Eye's cartoon history, I insisted that a group photograph be taken of all the 47 cartoonists gathered for this incredibly rare event. The only person missing in the photo is Ed. At the crucial moment, he hid behind Martin Honeysett. Afterwards, Honeysett turned to Ed and said, "What did you do that for?" Ed replies, "I know what I look like." He also enjoyed a healthy rivalry with fellow cartoonists. When Ed arrived late for an event, Ken Pine remarked, "You miss Bill Tidy?" To which Ed replied, "I wouldn't if I was in my car." But above all, he was hugely respected by his peers. The late Wally Fawkes Trogg, himself a brilliant artist, described Ed as the cartoonist's cartoonist. Tributes are poured in from young cartoonists grateful for his encouragement, as well as seasoned humorists. Giles Brandreth described him as a genius cartoonist, brilliant to the very end. Fans have deluged social media with their love for his work. One wrote, "The full-page tribute in Private Eye made me tear up a bit. What a wonderfully warped cartoonist he was." Others said, "By far the funniest, unsurpassed, quite simply the best, endlessly inventive, the greatest, and wise too. Thank you, Ed McLachlan." Not finished. I leave the last word to Private Eye's editor, Ian Hislop, who told me, "When I heard that Ed had died, my immediate compassionate reaction was to ask, 'Yes, but will he be sending us cartoons in as usual?' It was difficult to imagine doing an issue without one of his drawings. My advice to anyone editing the magazine when I was on holiday who asked, 'What if there isn't enough copy?' was always, 'No problem, just fill up the page with a big McLachlan.' No reader ever complained, no one ever said, 'That's enough, Ed.' So farewell then, Ed, how you will be missed, and like the car hit by that hedgehog. Thank you all for coming. Thanks, Nick Newman. Thank you to the girls. Pity about the looks. Thank you, Shirley. And thank you all, clients and friends, for coming.